Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the final of our autumn-winter series of the ETC Network Lunchtime Information Sessions for 2023. So hard to believe it's the end of 2023 already. For those of you who were not at our previous sessions, I see we have a few new attendees this month. My name is Anya Whelan, and I am an EU Projects Officer with the Southern Regional Assembly, and I facilitate the ETC Network. To all our new attendees at an ETC Network event, the ETC Network is a forum for ETC project officers in EU programs or projects, or those who are interested in EU projects, particularly in the Southern region, to learn, share, experience, and network with each other. So I suppose it's just important to say that you don't have to be an EU project officer, you don't have to have the title of an EU project officer. You can, maybe it's just that you're interested in being involved, you'd like to dip the toe, you'd like to find out more information. So it's a fairly open invite to join the network. A few points on housekeeping before we get started. And now apologies to the people who've been at the previous three sessions. This is the last time you'll have to hear these housekeeping for this year. So you'll be glad to hear at the end of it. But just for those who are, if this is their first session, as a participant, you are muted and your camera is turned off during the event. However, we do welcome your questions. The chat function is also muted, but you will notice there at the top of your screen, there is a Q&A tab that will provide you with the option to ask questions to today's speaker. I will be moderating the Q&A function and will approve your questions as they come in. You're welcome to ask questions throughout today's speaker's presentation, and then I will pose the questions to our speaker in the dedicated Q&A section that we have after the presentation. So we really do encourage you to ask questions. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but this is a short information session, so any questions that we're not able to answer, we'll collect them in the question box, and then we will be able to address them directly with the presenters and forward you on a response as soon as possible. Today's session is also being recorded, and along with the slides from today's presentation will be sent to you after this event. And the previous three sessions over the last couple of months were also recorded, so if you have missed any sessions or you'd like to share them with any of your colleagues, you can go on to the Southern Regional Assembly YouTube and you'll be able to watch those back there. So with that, I am delighted to welcome today's speaker. So Emma Murtagh is the Senior EU Programmes Manager at The Wheel. So The Wheel is Ireland's National Association of Charities, Community Groups and Social Enterprises. A key part of Emma's role is overseeing the delivery of Access Europe. So some of you may be familiar with this programme. It's a support and capacity building programme for the civil society sector around accessing and managing EU funding. Emma also works with the Wheel's policy team on European policy that affects the sector and creates opportunities for members to engage with EU decision makers. Emma is also responsible for driving the Wheel's own European development and designing projects that further the Wheel's strategic goals and support this sector. So this means overseeing a whole host of projects in a wide variety of areas that have been made possible through EU funding. So Emma is going to present to us today on identifying a suitable EU funding programme for your project idea. So Emma, I'll stop sharing now and leave you share your screen and hand the floor over to you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Anya. That was an excellent introduction. And I'm really delighted to be here today with everybody and to be part of this excellent series of events that Anya and her colleagues have organised. So bear with me for just 1 second while I share my screen. Sometimes it takes a second just to buffer, but Anya's kind of already introduced me there, so I don't really need to reiterate. But yeah, just to say that Access Europe, I'll talk a bit more about it later, but it's very much kind of a one-stop shop for all things EU funding. So we work very closely with the likes of the Southern Regional Assembly and other contact points for various EU programmes. And we kind of act as a central hub of all of that. So we'll get into that now shortly, but just to say welcome everybody to the session. I'm going to be talking about identifying a suitable EU funding programme from the perspective of the ETC programme. So I'll be using that as kind of a bit of an example as we go through. The goal is, it's a very short session. We're only going to do about 20 minutes and then we will have lots of time for questions. So I'm not going to be able to kind of go deep into any particular topic, but the goal is to kind of help you analyze your project idea and kind of get to the bottom of what your idea is so that you can identify where it best belongs in the whole world of European programs. So there's dozens of these different European programs and they're quite nuanced. It's not always the most intuitive system to navigate, hence why it's handy to have programs like Access Europe that can help you do that. But oftentimes it starts with kind of getting to the bottom of what your idea is and then finding a home for it within all the different European programs. So that's the kind of goal of today, and try not to worry about trying to wrap your head and understand everything. That's not really, as I said, you can always reach out to us at Access Europe. You can reach out to the Southern Regional Assembly and to a host of other different national contact points for various European funds. There's loads of help and support there. So it's not necessarily about trying to understand everything today. It's more about getting an insight into how European programs work and how you might start navigating them, if that makes sense. So the very first thing I wanted to talk about was that whole idea of understanding EU programs, because like I said, it's not the most intuitive. I'm going to assume that there's plenty of people in the room that are quite experienced with EU programs. There might also be a few beginners. So I'm going to kind of come at it as if people are beginners to try and be as inclusive as possible. So we'll start with what EU programs are. So essentially, they're largely thematic programs, and they're based around various societal challenges that have been identified via EU policy. So if we look at our kind of little wheel or circle in the corner there, this is something I often like to talk about when I'm training about EU programs, because it kind of helps to contextualize the whole thing as to, you know, what's the purpose of this funding? Why was it even developed to begin with? Why does the EU offer programs, and why does it fund projects the way that it does? And there is a logic behind it. Sometimes when people first get involved, it can feel so confusing and difficult, and it's kind of, you know, why is this system the way it is? But there is always kind of a reason for it. So the first thing to understand is that the whole point of EU funding programs is to identify or to tackle problems that were identified via EU policy. So it all starts with policy on the top left-hand side of our circle there. It all starts with policies. Many of you will have heard of different European policies like the European Pillar of Social Rights, the EU Green Deal, the cohesion policy, which is what underpins a lot of the Interreg programs, the ETC, European Territorial Cooperation programs are often underpinned by the cohesion policy, which is all around a kind of smarter, greener, more efficient kind of Europe. So there's a host of EU policies that have identified issues that need to be tackled. And from those policies come funding programs. So you can see policy results in programs. And oftentimes in, say, a big, huge policy like the cohesion policy or like the EU Green Deal, there's no one single program that funds everything to do with the Green Deal. Instead, you know, you see environmental topics and funding opportunities spread throughout a wide variety of different European programs. So yeah, you will often see, and once you kind of realize that when you're reading EU funding calls and kind of navigating the websites, you'll start to notice that that with every funding opportunity or with every, you know, description of a funding program, it will reference what EU policy this was set up to kind of advance or to further. So from policy comes programs, and that's where you get EU funding programs like the Interreg programs, like Horizon Europe, the world's largest research and innovation program, the Erasmus Plus program, which is, you know, all throughout Europe and even beyond, which is very recognizable, along with, you know, dozens of other ones. You've got Creative Europe, you've got the European Solidarity Corps for volunteering. There's a whole host and range of funding programs, and those programs fund projects. So from the programs come projects, and these are the kind of actions on the ground that are necessary to deliver on EU policy. So if we're going to achieve our big goals of the Green Deal, if the EU is going to achieve that, it recognises that it has to fund a whole host of projects, everything from big research and innovation projects that are going to tackle things like clean energy and stuff like that, right down to educational projects with young people, equipping them with sustainability skills, and then everything in between. So, you know, there's a whole host and range of different projects underneath that. And the reason that we then see it kind of feeding back into policy is because oftentimes the results of projects, particularly large scale projects like Interreg, like Horizon Europe, things like that, But even smaller scale ones, you know, oftentimes the results of those projects, the findings of those projects or the recommendations of those projects go on to affect policy, whether that's at national or at EU level. They feed back into the policy. So it kind of becomes a bit of a circle. So that's where it all comes from. And like I said, there's rarely one single program that deals with a societal challenge. Instead, you'll see aspects of environmental projects within the research field, within the LIFE program, within the Erasmus Plus program. You see sustainability and environmental issues being woven in across lots of different programs, and it's actually a very core pillar to the Interreg programs as well, because of that interregional cooperation around tackling things like climate change and other kind of environmental aspects. So really, what does that mean for you? You don't need to necessarily know all of the European policies and understand all of that kind of the policy framework for all of these things. It's just handy to know that that's how the projects kind of come about, and that when you're analysing your project idea and how it's about how it approaches the challenge, not about the challenge itself. So, you know, it's instead of, you know, what you want to do your project is you need to kind of get down to like, okay, it might be an environmental project or something like that. But in what way are you going to tackle that challenge? Is it through something like learning and education? Is it through, you know, are you going to tackle something like, you know, through health or through sport or through research or through technology? Or is it about activating citizenship? What is the means by which you're going to tackle your challenge, whatever it is? So depending on what it is you want to do, your method of doing it, it might make the program you go for might vary, depending on the means with which you want to address your problem. So look, like I said, that can be a little bit confusing. You don't have to understand all of it. That's not what it's about. It's not about explaining all of EU policy in 20 minutes, but it's kind of an insight into, you know, how it all works. And I have a handy example that will kind of hopefully illustrate this. So oftentimes people will come to me as in my capacity as Access Europe, advising people, particularly civil society organisations, particularly community, voluntary, charitable groups. They'll often say, well, I work with older people, so where's the funding for older? What fund do I apply for funding for older people? Or what fund do I apply for if I'm in a homelessness organisation? Or what fund do I apply for if I work with migrants or refugees or something like that? And that's not really how it works. You know, it's more about, well, what do you want to do with the people? Like is it an educational project? Is it an active citizenship project? Is it a research project? You know, it's more about what you're going to do rather than your target group. So let's take this example of a biodiversity project. If somebody were to come to me and say, well, I work in biodiversity, where do I apply? Well, it depends. What do you want to do? So there's a few different examples here. So say you have your biodiversity project and your vision is that you want to do large scale practical solutions, bringing together multiple stakeholders. So this is a big project. You're talking about a big budget, lots of partners, complicated projects. You've got your public, your private, your academic and community sectors all working together. Maybe it's concentrated across a specific region. Maybe our little bee friend there is, you know, a specific bee that's to a specific region in Europe, whatever it is. Is it about kind of shared challenges, you know, the shared challenge of protecting this bee in a specific region in Europe? Does it involve changes to policy? Does it involve some kind of economic development? For example, is it looking at how biodiversity might promote sustainable tourism? Or is it about developing natural assets and infrastructure? Well, then you might be looking at an Interreg project, because that's the kind of stuff that Interreg will fund. It's big budget projects, it's multi-sectoral, it's regional in nature. It's about, you know, focusing on what is unique to that region that it addresses. And that's the kind of stuff that they fund, and that's the kind of scale that you're funding at. So that's maybe an Interreg project. However, what if you're saying, no, that's not what I'm doing at all. I'm not interested in that. I want to do hands-on protection and restoration of habitats. This is proper environmental scientists, like going out. There was an example of a a project like this where it was, counting and cataloguing all the corncrake population in marshes and bogs in Ireland. This is proper kind of hardcore environmental science of habitat protection and restoration, helping specific habitats or species achieve their protected status, very closely aligned with EU policies like the EU's biodiversity strategy. Well, then you want to go to the LIFE programme, because that's a proper hardcore environmental science project, much more about hands-on protection of habitats, species, nature, and then things like climate mitigation and adaptation and clean energy and stuff like that. So that's an example of where you might actually go. It might be better suited as a LIFE project. But maybe you're like, no, that's not what it is at all. I'm not interested in that. Actually, I work for a university, or I'm in a higher education institute, or the project that I want to do is much more about international research cooperation around the issue of biodiversity, and setting up networks of academics and researchers, and high level, maybe new technologies for measuring biodiversity. This is high level, complicated academic stuff. It's a multi-million euro project, largely featuring universities, research institutes, maybe working with communities or working with local authorities and that to help with data collection and things like that. But ultimately, this is an academic, high-level research science project. Well, then you might be looking at Horizon Europe. But what if you say, no, it's not that at all. Actually, I don't want to do anything anywhere near as high level as that. I actually just want to do something around educating people about biodiversity, getting people involved, encouraging more active citizenship around biodiversity, particularly, if you want to work with marginalized people or young people. I want to exchange ideas with other organizations that care about biodiversity. It's about learning, it's about education, it's about volunteering, it's about active citizenship. That's the approach you want to take with your biodiversity project idea. Well, then maybe you'd want to look at Erasmus Plus and the European Solidarity Corps, or ESC, because that's the kind of thing that they fund. So you can see this single issue, this single interest of biodiversity, and there's more than that. Like, you could also, maybe if you wanted, like, that's just 4 examples, maybe you wanted to do something around, outdoor pursuits and nature and sport kind of thing, and how we can protect biodiversity while also enjoying outdoor pursuits. Well, then you might be looking at sport funding. Maybe you want to do something around creativity and biodiversity and how we can use the arts and culture and that to promote an understanding of the importance of biodiversity. Well, then you might be looking at Creative Europe. So you can see what I mean about how it's not necessarily about the topic, it's not necessarily about biodiversity, it's about what you want to do with that project, what you want to do with your idea, and then finding a home for it within the relevant programs. Things like Interreg, LIFE, Horizon Europe, Erasmus Plus, European Solidarity Corps, Creative Europe, the sport funding through Erasmus. This is an example. So I know that this might seem very confusing. It's kind of overwhelming to think that you could have several options for one topic. But the whole idea is that from the EU's perspective, it's that climate change, biodiversity crisis, circular economy, clean energy, all of those things, these are multifaceted problems. They're not going to be addressed through one particular approach. It needs to be a combination of regional cooperation, hardcore kind of environmental science, international research collaboration, and then on the ground education, volunteering, engaging communities. All of those things are needed in order to be able to tackle the big problem of this biodiversity crisis. And you can insert in any topic there, if it's clean energy, if it's inclusion, if it's integration of migrants and refugees, if it's changing demographics and aging populations, if it's inclusion in education and tackling loneliness and social isolation. Whatever the challenges, there is an EU funding opportunity there. There's an EU funding policy that is designed to tackle it, and it means that there's funding allocated to address it. And sometimes that means it's channeled through several different programs. So that's the idea. That I suppose goes to show that yeah, my little plus there to show that there's more projects. It goes to show that you know, these problems can be tackled in any number of ways. And that's where the thinking is. That's why all of these different programs exist. And it's why it can, like, in fairness, it's why it can often be quite complicated to navigate these things, and why it can feel so frustrating, because it's often, you know, oftentimes you just want to go to one place and get your biodiversity project funded, and it's very frustrating when that can't happen. And so that's why programs like Access Europe and the Southern Regional Assembly and national contact points are here to help. But I'll come to that now in just 1 minute. But just when you're analysing your project ideas, so it's about getting down, as I said, we've focused now on kind of channeling down to, like, okay, you want to do a biodiversity project, but what's your approach? Is it educational? Is it research? Is it interregional cooperation? You need to kind of focus on, well, what is your unique solution? So this is just a further kind of tool that you can use to help analyze your project idea and find which European program you are best suited to apply for. So the first thing, and I do this with every project I ever write, and most of my job is writing projects, I start with, what is the problem? What is the problem that you are addressing? Maybe it's your bee friend populations are declining and it's having an impact on all these other things. So what is your problem? Why is it happening? What will happen if nobody tackles it? So really try to get to the bottom of this problem and really identify what it is and what the issue is, and kind of communicate the gravity of the problem. Then you're going to propose a solution. And this is the key bit, because your solution, depending on what solution you're offering, it dictates which program you go to, as we saw on the previous slide. So what is your solution? What is innovative? What is the innovative solution? So it should be something new, something different, something that, you know, needs to be developed through funding. So what is the innovative solution that you're proposing? What are the steps involved? Try and be as particular as possible. You know, setting up an educational program, like, that sounds great. But first of all, it involves maybe some research, and then some development, and then some testing. Like, try and, you know, break it down into steps. So you want to try and be as detailed as possible about the steps that are involved, because that will help you determine, well, what expertise and skills do you need? Maybe through partnership, you could bring in somebody who has expertise on research, or who has expertise on the kind of scientific side of it, or maybe with digital learning, if you want to do something like that, or has expertise who, you know, in policy making, or whatever it is. You might need to bring in different types of expertise and skills. And then the last thing you're going to look at is your impact. So the whole point of any of these projects is to achieve impact. That's the only reason the EU funds this, is to make a change. Again, it kind of comes back to their policy idea. If you're not moving the dial and contributing in some way to addressing the issue, nobody expects one project to solve the biodiversity crisis, but you have to demonstrate that you're doing something to contribute to the solution, and that's your impact. So what will you achieve? Be as specific as possible. Don't be vague. You know, if you can at all, give numbers, give specifics. Who will benefit the most and how, because that demonstrates your target group, and what will have changed in them through this project. So maybe it's about educating young people about biodiversity, and maybe they'll come into the project knowing very little about the topic, and then by the end of it, they are little biodiversity champions in their communities, and it's made them more active citizens. It's made them feel more included, you know, all of this kind of thing. So it has an impact on them personally, and then it also has an impact on their environment. That's just an example, but you can see every single project, every single service, everything in our sector boils down to problem, solution, impact. So that's just, as I said, all of that, it can be very confusing, like throughout lots of names of different programs and things like that. Rest assured that you don't have to understand all of the programs. That is not for any one person to try and figure out. You just have to understand this bit. What is the problem you're addressing? What is the solution? And what is the impact? And then there are people you can talk to who can tell you where your program belongs. So it's handy to have an insight into why it is a bit complicated, but it's not your job to try and figure out which program your idea necessarily belongs to. There is services to support that. So you can come to us at Access Europe, you can explain your project idea to us, and we can help you find a home for it within all the different European programs. We also provide updates on different EU funding deadlines and news, lots of training and events, one-to-one support. We can even review applications, and we do kind of networking opportunities. And then, of course, vitally, we link you in. So if it sounds like an Interreg project, and if it sounds like something that's with the European Territorial Cooperation topic or something like that, we can link you in with the Southern Regional Assembly or with any of the other European contact points who are there, who are experts on their specific program. So we're very much a central hub, signposting people to the experts. So that's our role. And I think that's it. I'm really happy to answer any questions you have, but please do always, it's europe@wheel.ie. So if you have any questions, please do reach out, and hopefully we can, between all of us, between myself and Anya, we will figure out where your idea belongs and help you get things sorted. So that's it. I hope I didn't go too over time, Anya.
Not at all. You were actually spot on, Emma.
Okay,
so
great. Oh, full
thank
marks.
you so much. Exactly. So let me just get my slides back up there now. Can take a moment just for it to load up there. But
Yep.
look, thank you very much, Emma. That was a really, really excellent presentation with some really practical advice. But I think in general, you know, it can be a minefield for people. They can have these
Yeah.
project ideas and they just don't know where it fits in. So I think of real use to people will be your last slide there, with those services of Access Europe, because that's an amazing service. And between you know, either it's your ETC network, whether it's going to Emma through Access Europe, like there are supports there. You're not alone in it. And you know, if you have those great ideas, you know, you want to find the correct kind of avenue for it. So there is opportunities there to help you guiding with that. So thank you so much for that, Emma. So look, as mentioned previously, we will share Emma's presentation with you after this event, and we'll also provide you with upcoming ETC call deadlines, and also even just I know lots of people will be familiar, but just even the contact details for those national contact points, as Emma mentioned, because they really are experts on their individual programs, and they're there, in particularly on those programs to support you in that regard. So look, we'll move to the Q&A portion of this session. If you haven't already asked a question, you can do so by clicking on that Q&A button at the top of your screen, and I can then pose some questions to Emma. So we do have a few questions in, Emma, so I might just go to the first one that came in here. So I know you'd spoken there that Access Europe can help in reviewing your application. So someone has asked here, does Access Europe help you write projects? So
no.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we can help a lot. So we can help you kind of plan your project and kind of put structure on it and things like that, and kind of talk it out with you. We really do encourage organizations, and as much as possible, to do the writing themselves, because there's a huge amount of learning, and then they have control over it. And you know, sometimes it can be risky when you're working with external people, because they want to get you the funding and they might promise the sun, moon, and stars, and then you have to deliver the project. So you know, if you write the project, you have much more control over it. Although we have got some kind of consultants, a list of consultants that we work with and that we trust and know that know that they do good work, that we can recommend if people really can't write them in-house. But no, we can really help you refine and design your project idea and kind of hash it out. And we can help you to, if you give us enough time, we can review the application as well, just to give you some pointers and help you kind of maximize your points. But no, we don't, unfortunately, have the capacity to write the projects. And it's good to keep that learning in-house anyway.
And I will say there is a webinar for that. The first webinar of this series was with Rose Power on tips for writing a successful EU project application. So do go back and watch that on the YouTube. So the next one is, how do you create European partnerships? So for Interreg projects, I presume in particular.
Well, I think now I know that a lot of organizations like the regional assemblies, and I think Lergus as well, like these are different national contact points for, like there's often kind of events and initiatives to help people form networks and partnerships and stuff like that. So definitely tap into that. But honestly, like I've built dozens of these European partnerships, almost always like desk research, Google, looking at previous projects. There are some kind of partnership portals that can be helpful. They can vary in quality around Europe. And then we have a partner database on accesseurope.ie, but it's not supposed to be about finding European partners. We get Irish organizations to upload their profiles, and then we advertise it out into Europe to help, with the hope that more Irish organizations will be invited into projects. We want to kind of showcase how great Irish organizations are, and that everybody should invite them to their projects and stuff like that. So look, there's a number of ways like that, but the best thing you can do, and I'm really happy to share the link if you want, Anya, for the follow-up, is we do have a how to build a European partnership training that we do that breaks it down step by step, including how to go about reaching out and explaining your project and kind of setting up your partnership on the best possible footing. So, that's there as well. And we have that plus a host of other trainings that you can access, but that's always a popular one. So we can circulate that afterwards if people are worried about how do you build your European partnerships.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be useful. And that could even go hand in hand with the second of our ETC network webinars. This all sounds very planned. The second of our
Perfect.
ETC network that was with Sarah Daverin, who's national contact point for Interreg
Yes.
Northwest Europe. And she delivered a webinar on building your stakeholder group and partnership. So they'd go well hand in hand. And when it comes to portals as well, I know Interreg Europe would be the one I'm familiar with. Interreg Europe has a good partnership
Yeah.
portal as well that people could check out.
Yeah.
So, the next question is there somewhere that you can see a breakdown of all the different EU funding programs?
Yes, so obviously the EU Commission has the funding and tenders portal, which does have if you Google EU funding and tenders portal, if you come up, so it has all of the different programs there. However, what we've tried to do on Access Europe is try to kind of translate everything into as plain of English as possible. So we have got an EU funding guide. So it's accesseurope.ie, and you'll see EU funding guide in the navigation at the top, and you can click in and read about all the different programs. And we try to just simplify it into kind of a easy to scan, easy to navigate. You don't necessarily have to read 100 pages about. You can just read a couple of paragraphs, hopefully, and get an idea of the project, or of the program, I should say. So yeah, that's available. And again, I can kind of I can circulate a link for that as well, just in case it's handy.
Brilliant. Yeah, we might send out a few resources in the follow-up email after the event. That'd be great, Emma. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the next question we have here is it possible to apply for multiple calls to address different aspects of your project?
Yes, I would say that. I think it's kind of like, I suppose, if you might have this overall topic that you're working on and an overall strategy. Often people they want a one-stop funding solution for all of that. And every now and again in life that comes along. And even sometimes EU funding can be the answer to that. But more often than not, if you have big goals around addressing an issue, you're going to have to break it down into several different projects. And maybe, like I said, part of it is research, part of it is community outreach, maybe part of it is interregional cooperation, or whatever it is. It depends on the scale. But if it's a large scale topic that you're going for, and if you're talking about multi-annual goals that you have and big high-level strategies, I would kind of encourage people to look at it. And it might not all be EU as well. Maybe you look at the big overarching strategy that you have in a certain area, and you break it down into different topics, and some of them are ideal European projects and can be addressed through multiple different projects, or maybe one giant project. It depends. Again, you can talk to me about that if you want, and I can help you figure it out. But then some of it might be national funding, or some of it might be community fundraising or corporate sponsorship. So there's lots of different ways of tackling solutions and finding funding for that. So yeah, I would say there's nothing wrong with applying for multiple calls at once. There's nothing, like, it can be good. Just make sure you do have the capacity to, because there is a bit of, there's a lot of administration and things like that. Just make sure that you're not throwing yourself in at the deep end, particularly with EU funding. We would really recommend that you kind of be strategic and think long term. Don't throw yourself into loads of funding because you're like, well, I need funding right now. Try and kind of pace yourself and build your capacity gradually, because it has been the case in the past that EU funding kind of got a bad reputation because people did take on big projects. There wasn't support services like Access Europe at the time. People took on too much funding. They were completely overwhelmed and they had negative experiences. So we want to try and counteract that. And we really want to encourage people that, yes, by all means, go for different calls, diversify, break down your ideas into different projects, but just make sure that you have the capacity and you're being realistic about what you can manage. Like, that's important as well.
Definitely. So we have just a couple more. I'm just a little bit conscious of time, so I'll just go through these ones here. The next one is, do you need a profile of experience, qualifications in the area you wish to apply for? Can an individual, as opposed to an organization, be matched with others interested in the same area?
Okay, so one thing, the first things first, an individual can almost never apply for EU funding on their own. It has to be an organization, you have to be a legal entity, because when you think about it, the EU does not want to be in a situation where they have to argue with an individual about funding. There's very rare exceptions to this. I know that there's been kind of some residence grants, artistic grants given through Creative Europe for artists and stuff. But then again, it's almost always administered through an organization. So you almost always have to be an organization. You will have to be an organization in order to apply. You can totally get involved in European projects by reaching out to organizations that you're interested in that have European projects and volunteering to be involved in them, or offering expertise and maybe even working on them or whatever it is, like maybe joining organizations that work on projects and getting involved. So you can do that, but usually, you have to be an organization, you have to be a registered legal identity, or legal entity, I should say, with your own financial identity in order to access EU funding. Do you need a profile or experience or qualifications? So say if you are an organization, do you need to have experience, qualifications in the area you wish to apply for? So you do have to demonstrate that you are best placed to lead this project. Now, if it's a very small amount of funding, the demand isn't going to be high. But if you're looking for hundreds of thousands of funding, you'd want to have not necessarily an EU track record, but at the very least a national track record of delivering, say it's a youth project. You want to have experience under your belt and a network and expertise in-house and stuff like that. So you don't need necessarily EU qualifications or EU project management qualifications, but you need to demonstrate that you are you have knowledge of the field of the project that you're going to apply for. You don't necessarily need to be experienced in EU projects either. In fact, they really welcome newcomers, but I would always, depends on the organization and your capacity, but I would recommend you start with like smaller, more like accessible grants. Like maybe don't throw yourself into an Interreg project as a newcomer because they're quite challenging. Now people have done it and they've done it successfully, but yeah, if you can ease yourself in, it's a little bit of a gentler experience for everybody. But yeah, newcomers are very welcome, and certainly starting out small and working your way up is really recommended.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Emma. So we might do this as the last question. Someone has just asked, is there somewhere with a list of organisations in Ireland who have previously taken part in European projects, such as your Erasmus Plus?
Good question. There's no one for all the different programs. So you'll know this, Anya, all the kind of programs kind of operate a little bit in silos. So, and Access Europe is quite unique that we're working across multiple different programs. So at least for, like, I know that like a lot of programs will eventually, maybe at the end of the year or every couple of years, publish all the organizations that they have funded. So that'll be available somewhere on the internet, like, in a PDF or an Excel file. There's also a lot of the European Commission has these like maps, these interactive maps where we can go like Horizon Europe and you can see all the ones that are funded in Ireland. But in terms of a central database for all the programs and all the organizations that are funded, no, is kind of the answer for that. Like one thing, if you're interested in learning about like different projects in Ireland, like EU funding projects in Ireland, like honestly, it sounds very rudimentary, but like Google, like every single EU project more or less has a website, and on the website will be the list of partners and the contact details for those partners. So a lot of the time when I'm building European projects, when I'm building a partnership, for example, we just did a project, we just finished it up now actually, but a couple of years ago when I was writing it, we did a project about social enterprise. So I was literally Googling EU project, social enterprise, Erasmus Plus project, social enterprise, like just any topic that I could imagine that was relating. And I had a list, like it was just resulting in lots of different websites. I would like peruse through the partners, maybe notice that there's an Irish partner, reach out and ask them like, what was this project like? Were these partners good? That kind of thing. And like that's how you can kind of find out who's active in this space. And once you start doing that, you will notice some of the same names coming up again and again, because it is quite a niche little subsector, the EU programs world. So yeah, and once you kind of tap into a few people who are working on your area and maybe running projects, and like most people are very open and very happy to talk to you about their projects and share their learnings and stuff like that, but it helps you kind of tap into that whole community and learn a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, and I know even with the ETC programs, I'm nearly sure most of them have on their websites where you can go back and look at their projects from previous program periods, and you can most of them have filter options, so you could filter Ireland and see Irish partners. But it's a really good question, and definitely probably a body of work that does need to be needs to
it
be
would be
done. So
thousands of organizations anyway. It's just to
yeah.
try and see all of them that have, like, for all the different types of funding.
Mhm.
You can kind of understand why they do it per program as opposed to, that's why it's also hard to get figures like how much EU funding is Ireland drawing down, because we know by program, but we don't necessarily know, so it's a bit of a minefield.
Definitely. Okay, that was great. Thanks very much. And thanks also for people asking questions. I really
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thanks, Emma. So look, I'd like to thank you, as always, the member of our ETC network, for your continued engagement and for your support in shaping the topics that we covered this year for the autumn winter series of lunchtime sessions. For those of you who are not members of the ETC network, you can scan the QR code you see on your screen now to join. And I suppose just to have a little recap of the last 4 months, we've had presentations on a variety of topics relating to EU projects, including writing your project application with Rose Power of the Southern Regional Assembly, creating a successful partnership and stakeholder group for your EU project with Sarah Davrin, who is the national contact point for Interreg Northwest Europe, and tips on communicating your EU project with Helena Stromberg, who is the communications officer with the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly. And then, of course, last but not least, we had Emma today on selecting a suitable EU funding programme for your project idea. So I know with the ETC network, we have a variation of experience when it comes to EU project engagement with ETC members. Those of you who have years and years of experience working on EU projects, and those of you who maybe have not worked on an EU project. But I hope you've all managed to pick up some useful information and little bits of nuggets of information over the last few months from these sessions, and you found them to be engaging and interesting. We would very much appreciate if you could complete a short survey on the sessions that I'll send out. It could be tomorrow or possibly Monday, just so that we can continue to deliver ETC network events that are informed by our members. Because at the end of the day, you're the ones who will inform the network. I'm facilitating it along with my colleague Lisa, but we really want it to be informed by our network. So with that, I'd like to take this opportunity again to thank our presenter today, Emma. Emma has a very busy day today. She's down in Cork for a wheel event, so she's managed to find a quiet place to deliver this presentation today. So admire the multitasking, Emma. So thank you
Well, I was
very,
going to
very
say,
much.
admire Nananego Place, which is where we are today.
Yeah,
It's lovely.
lovely.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
so thanks a million for that, Emma. Really
Thank you for
appreciate
having
it.
me. That was lovely,
Yeah.
lovely to do it. Thank you.
Oh, definitely. I know it's a busy time of year for people, so really appreciate you making the time. And I also have to say thank you to Maria Murphy and Anna Higgins, who provided me with technical support behind the scenes for these sessions. I wouldn't have been able to do it without you, so thank you very much for that. And with that, that concludes our autumn winter series of lunchtime information sessions for 2023. I've been in this position of facilitating the ETC network along with my colleague Lisa Moran, who lots of you know Lisa's currently on maternity leave, but I've been facilitating it with Lisa since March, and it's been a real pleasure to engage with members during that time. And those of you who I haven't engaged with, really hope that we'll get to engage in 2024. And please, if the network can be of any support to you or your project, please do get in contact. You'll have my email through the monthly updates I send out. We'll have one going out next week, and also in the follow-up email that I'll send out after this session. And some good news also to let you know, we are hoping to put on our annual in-person ETC Network conference in April of next year, and I'll be able to give you some more information on that in the new year. So I suppose all that's left to say is just thanks again to Emma, thanks to all of you, and wishing you all a happy and healthy Christmas break. And I look forward to meeting you all again in person, hopefully in 2024. Thank you very much. Thanks, Emma.